Hi, I'm Jay Polaki, and this is the HR Bytes podcast, where HR practitioners share their think globally and act locally digital HR agenda. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the HR Bytes podcast. Our guest today is Albert Loyola. Welcome to the show, Albert. How are you today?
Amazing. Great to be here. Looking forward for our conversation.
Thank you, Albert. So, Albert, you've been in the management consulting space as a global consultant in the human and AI and human capital industry. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got started here and what's really exciting you at this time in this whole revolution of technology in our workplace?
Yeah. So I started my journey maybe 15 years ago. I was working in the oil and gas industry. And I do remember that my boss told me, Albert, we're going to hire a bunch of data scientists to help us to improve the drilling operation. So back in the time, data scientist was a fancy term, and everybody was not clear on what exactly these guys are going to do. So long story short, I was exposed to what they were doing to drilling operations, how do they create efficiencies, how do they analyze data, create modeling, and so on. So then I thought, why don't we bring this to human capital and HR? That's where I started my journey in artificial intelligence when it comes to human capital and connecting talent to business value. Joined a consultant firm, and then I had the opportunity to work in different engagement, working closely with CHROs and the C-suite to start thinking about how can we bring this new technology to enable experience, but also at the same time, what's the role of HR to be able to advise the business when it comes to connecting technology, data, and employee experience. Uh,
Wonderful. So, there's so much technology today at the fingertips of HR practitioners and professionals. How do you think we should be approaching the automation and AI for the HR function that's taken over our collective imagination? And how should we as HR leaders prepare our function for this increased use of automation and AI?
so this is a question that I get all the time, and it's something that is getting a lot of attention from the C-suite all the way to the regular employee, right? So in my experience working with some Fortune 500 clients, there are 4 steps in the process. Number one is you need to prepare the organization for it, right? That means, for example, to create awareness campaigns, educational campaigns at all levels across your organization. You need to communicate clearly to your workforce and to your leadership team what's the value, how do you connect experiences with work and workplace, and have those discussions, put together different forums and make it accessible for everybody, right? And after you define that educational component and prepare your organization for AI, then you move to the second phase, what I call the alignment when it comes to link AI with business value. So that's where you spend most of your time working closely with the C-suite and the CHRO to define how do we define the automation potential? What's our vision around AI when it comes to talent and HR? And which are the specific use cases that we want to focus on currently? As you're defining that strategy, then you move to phase three, which is more around assess your current state, right? So now that you have your strategy, you have the capabilities you need, you have the specific use cases that you want to focus on, then you need a baseline and starting point. So that's where you focus on a specific HR capability areas within the HR function and start thinking about what's the automation potential? What's the readiness? What's the level of maturity of my HR capability areas, all the way from talent acquisition to performance and career mode? That will inform the way how you can execute and develop your strategy, which is the last stage in the process, which is activate the plan. That's where you combine the different capabilities, the priorities, the use cases, and put together an enablement plan to execute your strategy.
So you're saying we can't just jump into Chat GPT without all of this.
That's the first step, right? So you prepare, you make people, aware about what's going on. Just let them experiment, right? That's where most of the companies are right now. They are just testing what it is, how it works, lessons learned. So that's where I would say it's the main stage right now for AI and human capital.
Wonderful. So in the midst of all this, there's the human, right? How do we keep our strategy focused on the human at all times in the midst of all this technological revolution happening around us?
So I would say there are four considerations. Number one is technology is going to keep evolving. We think, right? Every year there is something, right? 2 years ago we saw the whole AI, and now we see, generative AI changing the entire way how companies bring value to their customers, but also changing the way how you enable employee experience. So number one is start thinking about whatever technology you bring is what's the connection with the employee experience end to end. What are those moments that matter that you want to enable with technology to make a consumer grade experience, right? Number two is start thinking about governance and human oversight when it comes to technology. That's going to be critical as you deploy your new AI strategy. Define what's the governance and what's the role of human testing, analyzing, and providing feedback to AI predictions, right? So that balance is going to be critical as we evolve the technology every day. And then with that in mind, employees need to be understand, what's going on behind the scenes. So you need to be transparent and with direct levels of accountability,
Mhm.
right? Tell the employees this is how the technology works, what are the limitations, what you should do or you shouldn't, and kind of like create those policies and go fast. And lastly but not least is more around the security and compliance. And I'm gonna pause here for a second because generative AI, for example, is creating a revolution of new technology in the HR technology ecosystem. So most likely you're gonna see all this year and in 2025 more vendors coming into compete in this category. Let's say I'm gonna create a new copilot. But keep in mind that those copilots, whatever technology you wanna use or whatever vendor, those vendors have been launched those technologies based on public data, which means that if you want to make the prediction accurate to your organization, it needs to be trained on your enterprise data, right? That means, for example, that you need to have a solid data foundation, and define clearly how the data pipeline is going to go from the way how you analyze the data, how you extract the data, all the way to have that data ready for machine learning. That's going to be the key as you deploy and scale your technology. So that's something also to consider.
Well, our HR functions data is everywhere. It's not in one consolidated space. It's not in, one kind of a data lake that can be easily accessed. What's your advice on how do we even start cleaning the data to make it viable for implementing AI in our function?
I think there is one step back to consider on this. And I'm going to use a conversation that I had with a chief data officer last week. He told me, Albert, we started experimenting with AI, educating our workforce. We are running a series of meetings with the board and the CEO on this. However, if you ask me, are we ready for generative AI? My answer is going to be no. And the reason why is because we need to have a specific structure around data because now we have a technology that is analyzing the structure and unstructured data, text, images, voices, and then make predictions, right? So that involves, for example, prepare your data for prime time, specifically on human capital. And what I mean by that is three steps in the process. Number one is think about the use case and the problem you want to solve. right? That's going to be critical because if you start thinking about the entire HR strategy or the entire HR function with multiple use cases, there is no way you can finalize this in the short run, even in midterm. So focus on the problem that you want to solve, whether it's people analytics, whether it's talent acquisition or something else. Based on that, define specifically what are the data components that you need in order to make predictions or be able to create experiences or hire at a scale, and define that data architecture working closely with your chief data officer to define what that data technology stack is going to look like. Keep in mind that the best way to do this is working closely with those IT and your chief data officers so you can scale whatever they have. They are the experts. So you need to partner with them to define what's the data framework and the pipeline that you need in order to have solid products to make predictions or enable any other use case across the timeline.
Thank you. That's very insightful. Given that every CEO today has to grapple with AI and how they are going to implement it in their businesses, and a lot of the big tech CEOs are predicting that AI is going to be smarter than humans as early as maybe next year or even 5 years by 2030. What do you foresee for the HR function in the business in 2024 and beyond? What do you think we should be doing? What should we be setting these big, hairy, audacious goals to, increase AI in our function and bring it not just as a band-aid approach, but actually change how we work by implementing AI-based technology?
I think there are a couple of things to consider, right? Number one is there is going to be a huge role for HR when it comes to enable adoption and change. Because bringing the technology is simple. The problem is here is to change people's minds and make them feel like they can develop new skills and new ways of working and different ways to collaborate. That is the hard part. So sometimes I'm in conversation with people say, well, implemented this technology in HR, but it's not working. But then when you deep dive into the details, you realize the problem is not the technology itself. It's just the fact that, for example, internal mobility, you bring a technology for internal mobility, and the managers are not ready to let their best employees to go to do a gig or to move to a different role. So then you're talking about option and mindset and change management, right? So the point that I'm trying to make is that's going to be one of the key roles for HR to be able to define what's the path forward when it comes to change management and the adoption and the role of leadership and culture. So that's number one. Number two is how do we make sure that our HR professionals are AI driven people? Meaning, how do they get more familiar or new skill or upskill on HR technology around AI and data so that they can make better decisions when it comes to define your end-to-end HR technology stack? And the reason why I'm saying this is because in multiple conversations, I've seen different vendors with overlapping capabilities. So then if you define your future looking technology stack for HR and talent, then you need to be able to have that conversation with the vendors, with the CHRO and senior leadership to explain how are you connecting talent to business value powered by this new technology stack. So that's number two. And number three is more around how do you define the new metric to prove that this new technology is increasing productivity, but also at the same time is bringing value to the business when it comes to whether bringing the right talent to prepare the organization for a new market or the developing a new product and services. How are we able to provide that advisory to senior leadership and define those metrics that prove that HR is bringing value with this new AI-driven technology?
Wonderful. So given that we have to prepare and be ready and be very strategic in our approach to AI, what are you most worried about for this year for the HR function in general? And if you had a magic wand, what would be your ideal solution to take care of this challenge?
I think I'm going back to prepare the HR function for a massive change, right? So if you're going to ask your organization to be open to change, as HR function, you need to be open to take, develop new mindset, be able to work in a different way, be open to experiment with technology. So you need to lead with example. So for example, I was in a workshop 2 days ago, and I was asking to these HR professionals, please raise your hand if you have the chance to experiment with the Microsoft Copilot. And maybe from the 50 people, maybe only five had the option to try it and experiment. So the point that I'm trying to make is if you're bringing any Copilot solution, then how can you educate and communicate if you haven't experienced that? So that's number one, right? Just be familiar, be comfortable with new technology, make people feel psychological safety when it comes to bringing this new technology, right? Because the first thing that people are gonna think is you're bringing technology to replace jobs or just lay off a bunch of people. That could happen, but also at the same time, keep in mind that there are going to be new roles that are going to be created. So that's something has been in technology for the last 100 plus years. So how do you make sure that you make people psychological safety on one side of the house, but also on the other side of the house, start thinking about what's the balance when it comes to technology, workforce, and jobs.
Wonderful. So, what's one piece of advice you have for all our HR colleagues who are looking to adopt or learn new technology? And what do you wish HR teams in general knew better to be prepared for 2024 and beyond?
I think this is something that I done personally. Um, there are a couple of vendors that provide a well-rounded training on AI, specifically on HR. So spend some time, sign up for those courses, and be able to for you to understand what it is, how it works, and what's the value. Because executives are going to ask you for that. So just take one of those courses and then also have the opportunity to learn about data. There are a bunch of courses, multiple vendors that offer that approach. Just take a course related to data strategy, right? And then if you are more curious, then take a training around generative AI. Multiple vendors again provide that overview. You need to be technical, right? Just to have a clear understanding of how it works, what's the connection with talent, with process, with technology, with data, and so on. So you can be in a better position to explain clearly to your audience within your organization.
Great. Thank you for that. That's really good advice. So this brings us to the question connection section of our conversation, the funner part of our conversation, if you want to call it that. So we can connect better with the audience and they can connect better with you. So who is one person, Albert, that you've gained in your network in the HR tech space in the last year that you think more people should know about and connect with?
Well, someone that inspired me on this is Jason Averbook. Is someone that is working in a different consulting firm, which I had the opportunity to meet last week. So it was a good conversation when it comes to changing ideas, similar to the ones that you asked me today. Albert, what's the future of HR? What's the role when it comes to generative and artificial intelligence and so on? So it was a good conversation, someone that always inspired me and provide feedback. So
Love Jason, definitely. And we'll mention and link him in the show notes as well. Your favorite HR podcast or HR tech related book that you'd recommend?
I don't want to mention consulting names, but there is one leading consulting firm that has an amazing podcast and is always thinking about the future. specifically on the future of HR, the future of workforce, you just need to just go to the Copilot, to your Copilot, and look for what are the leading podcasts when it comes to human capital, and you will know what I'm talking about.
Okay. All right then. What song would you add to a playlist we are curating? We are calling it the HR playlist for working from anywhere.
Oh, that's a good one. I would say, oh my God, I forgot about that one. I don't know. Like you got me on that one. I got it
Well,
right here.
you can always send me a text message and let me know which song you want me to play here. So, yeah.
Okay.
Um, any LinkedIn learning or e-learning courses? You mentioned some of them earlier in our conversation that you'd particularly recommend that we look up.
Yes, yes. So you can take trainings. Well, let me break it down. So obviously, Josh Bersin has just launched a brand new course on generative AI for HR. I will suggest that that's a good option. Number two, you can use also the courses by the leading data companies, right? Again, I don't want to mention it, but if you take any of those courses, you will have a well-rounded understanding around data strategy. Um, and then with that in mind, then the same for generative AI, right? Even you can go to those learning providers and then you could just ask a copilot again, a good opportunity for everybody to experience the copilot. Just ask the copilot, I'm looking for a generative AI course. Which one would you recommend? That's what I did a year ago. So that's a good way to experience with that. And then you will have some options.
Okay. And how do you enjoy giving back to the HR community? I know you do a lot of community work, but specifically to the HR community.
So one of the things that I'm passionate about is to share my experiences. Um, and in previous life I couldn't do it. But now I have the opportunity, and probably you notice that every 2 weeks I post something, but it does something that to some post something that brings value to other practitioners, right? Other consultants when it comes to human capital, planning, HR, technology, just to educate and to your point, give back to the community. I do it because I'm passionate about it, because I know some people will use it for whatever problem they are trying to solve in their organization.
Absolutely. No, I follow you for that particular post, actually. So thank you for doing that. I really appreciate it. So that brings us to the end of today's conversation. Albert, if our listeners would like to connect with you, what's the best way for them to reach you?
They can find me on LinkedIn, on my LinkedIn profile, and they also can explore my website where I share content for free. My website is Ignite Organizations with S at the end.com.
Okay, we'll link that in the show notes as well. So thank you so much for being here, Albert. I really appreciate you sharing all of these insights with me and our listeners today. And I look forward to following you on LinkedIn and learning from you as you share your insights. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay.
Listen on your favorite podcast channels and watch us on YouTube. Follow us on social. We are on LinkedIn, X, Instagram, Facebook, and Threads. Join our budding community on LinkedIn and Facebook. Ask, answer, advise.